Well, relations between North and South Korea remain tense a day after Pyongyang threatened to restart military exercises in the demilitarized zone. Tensions on the Korean peninsula hit a new low on Tuesday when Pyongyang blew up its joint liaison office with Seoul. Up until a year ago, the two had been making steps toward a more peaceful coexistence. There's little sign of any of that now.
It was hailed as the big moment of peace and reconciliation.
하나, 둘, 셋.
The opening of the North-South Korea Joint Liaison Office in September 2018. Part of the two countries' efforts to reduce tensions on the peninsula. Now those hopes and the building lie in ruins. The two countries are technically still at war. Their 50-year-old conflict ended in a truce, not an actual peace treaty. After years of peace efforts, a breakthrough came with the South Korean 2018 Winter Olympics. The two rivals even announced the creation of a single unified women's ice hockey team to enter the Games. Hopes kept growing with an inter-Korean summit a few months later. Pyongyang and Seoul promised to pursue a denuclearization of the peninsula. There were even talks of a permanent peace deal. Then the moment many thought would never happen. A US president setting foot on North Korean soil. Donald Trump held face-to-face meetings with the North's Kim Jong Un. But the much-hyped talks didn't amount to much. Last November, the North again increased its long-range missile tests. But when North Korean defectors, based in South Korea, recently sent balloons with propaganda leaflets across the border, Pyongyang threatened with consequences, even military action. The comments announced on North Korean TV were attributed to Kim Jong Un's influential sister, Yo Jong, not the leader himself. She's a close ally who's become one of the regime's most powerful voices in recent years. These latest developments are not only a big setback to ongoing peace efforts, but also a personal defeat for South Korea's President Moon Jae-in, whose administration had been pushing for further engagement with the North.
And let's get more now. We are joined by Robert Kelly, who is a political analyst on inter-Korean affairs and an associate professor in political science at Pusan National University. He joins us now. Welcome to the program. Tell us, because we have North Korea threatening to move its military into the demilitarized border areas. How high is the risk of a further escalation?
Well, the movement back wouldn't actually be too big a deal. The two Koreas signed in the last couple of years a few agreements to sort of retrench a little bit back from the demilitarized zone. The demilitarized zone is the strip that runs right through the middle of the country, and there's no military forces there. Well, there are, but not much. The real issue is that the North Koreans had sort of offered to sort of begin to sort of pull back a little bit. They've got an enormous amount of force very close to the South Korean capital, and that looks like it will be unwound, but it doesn't really threaten South Korean security very much. I think the real issue in the next 8 months or so, maybe 6 months to a year, is whether or not the North Koreans will actually launch some kind of armed provocation against South Korea. They've done this kind of stuff for decades. That hasn't happened in several years. I think that's the real possible escalatory step that people worry about.
Pyongyang saying that the tensions are over North Korean defectors sending propaganda over the border. That's nothing new. Right. So, I mean,
right.
why is this happening now?
Yeah, it's probably not because of the leafleting. The North Koreans have endured that for a while. They don't like it, obviously, and they've taken actions against it in the past. But the demolition of the building probably wasn't really about that. I think it was really sort of a signal. Again, there's been a buildup of North Korean rhetoric in the last few months. And I think this was sort of a culmination of that rhetoric. There's been this sort of effort to sort of get Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, to act independently of the Americans and the international community and strike a deal on North Korea. The North Koreans really want sanctions relief, but Moon Jae-in really can't do that because, one, legally he's bound by the rules at the UN, and then politically he's bound by the sort of constraints of the American alliance. The alliance is very popular in South Korea, and so even if Moon would like to go off and sort of do something independently, he really can't because he would face massive blowback here. And so this has kind of left him stuck, and the North Koreans have been pushing and kind of bullying him, and this was the latest step in that. That's what this is really about. They're trying to get a deal out of the South.
Okay, so they're trying to get a deal. Let's talk about the face also that has become very prominent in all of this. The face of last week's escalation, it's been not North Korean leader Kim Jong Un, as we might expect,
Right.
but rather his sister. Why is that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of speculation about this, right? Sort of the rise of the sister in the background. And the most obvious reason probably is because North Korea is a bloodline monarchy, and she is the most obvious person to take over, in that we don't know if Kim Jong Un has children. There's sort of rumor, people think he does, but they would be too young, right? And so we kind of assume that the sister would have to sort of take over. There's sort of an interesting debate there about whether or not the North Korean elites could sort of accept the female ascension. That's sort of another issue. So that's one thing, right? Because she's close to Kim. She has sort of taken over stuff just because of the bloodline relationship. And then also, I think to a certain extent, Kim Jong Un wants to avoid personally putting his hands on this mess, because if it does, if things do turn around, if things do get better, he can say, oh, that was my sister, right? I'm still interested in peace. So it's kind of like a good cop, bad cop kind of routine, I think.
So he has some plausible deniability there. Robert Kelly in Busan,
Right.
putting all of these tensions on the Korean Peninsula into perspective for us. So we thank you very much for sharing your expertise today.
Thank you for having me.
For more, let's bring in correspondent Frank Smith in Seoul. Good day to you, Frank. Can you take us through this latest escalation? How did we get to this point?
Well, we need to go back to 2018 when we had a couple of summits, several summits, some between North Korean leader Kim Jong Un and U.S. President Donald Trump. But for our purposes today, the two summits or three summits between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un. And they drew up the so-called Panmunjom Declaration. And part of that involved a drawdown of tension along the border, an elimination of propaganda activities that had taken place, between the two Koreas, including things like loudspeakers set up along the border blasting anti-North Korea messages toward the north from the south, and the dismantling of guard posts on both sides of the heavily militarized DMZ. One of the activities that had continued since that time is the flying of leaflets across the border by balloon by South Korean NGOs, non-governmental organizations led by North Korean defectors. One of those groups is led by Park Jung-oh, and he sends rice and medicine and sometimes lately anti-coronavirus masks in plastic bottles by the ocean. And I had a chance to talk to him earlier this week. North Korean defector Park Jung-oh has been sending rice and medicine to North Korea in plastic bottles using ocean currents for 4 years. Now, following Pyongyang's recent complaints, South Korean officials have vowed to stop such activities, but Park is undeterred.
I don't know why the government is trying to stop this now. They should say that there is nothing they can do, because this is a non-governmental group activity. I think it would be wrong to suppress such organizations because of what was said by North Korea's Kim Jong. I'm confused whether I live here in Seoul or in Pyongyang.
Jung-oh's brother, Park Sang-hak, has been sending leaflets critical of the Kim regime by balloon over the border for more than a decade. The two brothers fled North Korea some 20 years ago and call for South Korea to push back against Pyongyang. Critics, though, argue that actions like theirs only provoke North Korea. Activists like those gathered here today outside the Blue House, South Korea's presidential compound, show the stark division in public opinion over how to deal with North Korea. Some advocate a hardline approach, while others, like most of those gathered here today, favor renewed efforts at engagement and peacemaking. This civic group is calling for President Moon Jae-in to implement the deals he made in two landmark summits with North Korean leader Kim Jong Un in 2018, which include suspending cross-border propaganda.
No
matter what kind of non-governmental organization is involved, the South Korean government can stop them, and the South Korean government should stop them from sending flyers to North Korea and should implement the Panmunjom Declaration.
After North Korea Tuesday blew up the Joint Liaison Office in Kaesong, just inside North Korea, South Korea offered to send an envoy, a move which was rejected by the North. Defector Park Chung-oh is against any further attempts at appeasement and wants South Korea to stand up to North Korea.
If we kneel, North Korea will continue to move in the same direction. If we stay strong, our 50 million people can be free from threats. We need to have the confidence of a sovereign state.
As the tension simmers and despite warnings police will interfere, Park still plans to monitor the tide and send bottles of rice to North Korea.
Frank, Pyongyang's blaming the tensions on North Korean defectors like Park Chung-ho, who sent propaganda across the border. But this isn't anything new, so why the harsh response from the North?
Well, we're hearing a lot of different analysis here in South Korea. It's hard to really divine North Korea's reasoning behind some of its policies, especially in this case. If we look at a couple of things, first of all, COVID-19 has gripped, by many reports, North Korea, and so the regime might be trying to distract people from that, but a lot of analysts are saying this is messaging to the United States over the ongoing United Nations Security Council sanctions against North Korea that prevent North Korea from engaging the international community, especially in terms of commerce. So that's the primary takeaway. It's not necessarily just about these leaflets, but it's about that greater issue of North Korea's isolation.
Now, in front of the cameras, the face of the latest escalation has not been North Korean leader Kim Jong Un, but instead his sister, Kim Yo Jong. Why is she playing such a prominent role right now?
Well, I think if we go back a month or two ago, when the reports came out of North Korea that Kim Jong Un was gravely ill, that later proved to be, somewhat false, we were asking ourselves who would be the next leader of North Korea. At that time, I interviewed Lee Sung-hyun of the Sejong Institute just outside of Seoul, and he said that if we hear about Kim Yo Jong's achievements and her policy, if she's more present in North Korean propaganda, then that means she is more than likely the presumptive heir to the North Korean regime, to the Kim dynasty. And that's certainly what we've seen in this recent cycle of escalated tension on the Korean peninsula.
Frank Smith, thanks so much for that from Seoul.